As I stood behind the counter of the cozy little coffee shop, steam swirled around me like a comforting embrace. I caught sight of him. Jacob sauntered in, a picture of casual confidence. He wore shorts and a tank top, as if he jogged there from the gym, careless of the drizzle outside. The fact that even if it were summer, it probably still would not be warm enough to merit the outfit he wore. I couldn't help but notice his disheveled appearance, a stark contrast to the tidy atmosphere of the cafe. Yet, despite his unconventional attire, there was an undeniable magnetism about him. Maybe it was the hint of mystery in his eyes, or the way his tousled hair fell just so. Or perhaps it was the subtle scent which preceded him, a musky mix of sweat and rain, strangely alluring in its rawness. Really, it was in his scent, and not some manufactured cologne or soap or anything like that. This was the odor born from behind his ears and inner elbows. Molecules sprayed from the depths of his exposed armpits. I found myself drawn to him, my gaze lingering longer than it should. It was rare for me to feel such an instant attraction, but there was something about him that stirred a flutter of excitement within me. I know it's all too much information, but I cannot explain enough how much I was attracted to something which would repel most people far away. As he approached the counter, I did my best to keep my composure, masking my inner turmoil with a practiced smile. I looked him up and down to make sure I had a decent recording of all the goods. I engaged him in conversation, my words flowing effortlessly, despite the chaotic whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. I couldn't explain the nastiness that stirred within me because of the nastiness he projected around him, but I loved every minute of it. Thankfully, he seemed oblivious to my internal struggle. His attention focused solely on the menu board above my head and not the perv ready to attack the next time his jerking shoulder made all the muscles on the side of his neck flex. Meanwhile, the woman waiting in line behind him grew increasingly impatient, tapping her finger on the old bar with annoyance. I ignored her silent protests, my focus solely on him. Yet, as I felt myself losing track of time, my boss appeared beside me, her presence a sharp reminder of reality. I knew what he was. Deep down I could sense it, though I wasn't ready to admit it to myself yet. I wanted to savor this moment, to bask in the fleeting pleasure of his presence, much like our customers did with their favorite brews. But as I watched him leave the counter for a table, a double shot in hand, the lingering question remained. Would he taste as good as he smelled? Usually worse, which in this case was better. As he sipped the espresso I'd crafted for him, oblivious to my lingering gaze, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. I knew I crossed the creepy line way before this moment, but there was something about him that compelled me to keep watching. And then, like a piece falling into place, I noticed her. The woman who had been standing impatiently in line behind him wasn't just a random customer. She was following him, her gaze fixed on him. I knew what this meant. I knew exactly what kind of danger she was made of, but I couldn't afford to lose my job. Not now. I couldn't just walk off. So, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, I made a split-second decision. Feigning illness, I stumbled away from the counter, clutching my stomach and groaning in pain. I waved my boss away from my obvious bad acting, but what could she do fire me? Someone who never missed a shift? My performance took longer than I hoped, and he was a few steps ahead of me before I could even grab my umbrella and jacket. As he left the cafe, the woman trailed behind him. Panic threatened to consume me. I fumbled putting my arms through the jacket sleeves, then getting the umbrella to deploy as the pouring rain soaked my shoes. I hated being wet in any kind of clothes, but I looked forward and she wasn't far behind. And then, with a burst of determination, I dashed after them, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey!" I called out, my voice reaching them despite the rain. The woman ripped around to look at me, her eyes widened in surprise. She got a good look at what I was before she turned and fled into the darkness. Jacob spun around, of course too late to see her as these things usually go. Confusion was etched on his features as he tried to make sense of the commotion I caused. I knew I had to act fast, to come up with some semblance of an explanation before he would bolt. So, with a sheepish grin, I stumbled over my words, babbling about a misunderstanding and how I wanted to make sure he was okay. At first, he regarded me with wary suspicion, his guard raised against the unexpected intrusion. But then, as I flashed him a winning smile, he seemed to melt, his defenses crumbling beneath the weight of my charms and extremely good looks. So sue me if I wasn't humble. At least I never pretended I didn't know what I was. Before I knew it, he agreed to go on a date with me. His laughter rang out against the backdrop of the rain-soaked streets. And as we made plans for the following night, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement, tinged with the lingering shadows of uncertainty. But for now, in this moment, all that mattered was the promise of what lay ahead. The anticipation leading up to our date was unbearable. I'd spent hours meticulously grooming myself and selecting the perfect outfit. But as I stood outside the nondescript bar where we'd agreed to meet, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Jacob arrived, looking disheveled as ever. It was clear he hadn't put nearly as much effort into his appearance as I did into mine. And as the night wore on, it became clear his priorities lay more with the contents of his glass than with our supposed romantic rendezvous. He drank with abandon, his laughter growing louder and more raucous with each sip, gulp, and swallow. It wasn't the ideal evening I envisioned, and as I caught a whiff of his intoxicating scent, I couldn't help but feel a pang of longing mixed with unease. Part of me knew I should walk away, to distance myself from someone so evidently lost in their own lives. But another part, a deeper, more primal instinct, urged me to stay by his side, to protect him from whatever dangers lurked. And then, as if on cue, a predatory figure appeared from the dance floor, his gaze fixated hungrily on Jacob. I acted without hesitation, wrapping a supportive arm around his form and guided him away from the danger that threatened to consume him. It wasn't my responsibility to see him all the way home, but it was my duty. I stumbled along the streets with him, the rain soaking us all the way through. Finally, we reached his apartment. It was pretty sizable considering he lived alone. It was shockingly clean and not at all what I expected. Based on his appearance, I pictured a small dingy place I wouldn't want to remove my coat in. I was careful not to drip too much as I laid him down in his large bed. But before I knew it, his breath was hot against my neck. He groaned words of desire in a deeper voice, which dragged the words out more. His fingers traced lazy patterns down my bare neck and underneath my shirt. I stood immediately before I allowed my own breath to deepen. I couldn't succumb to temptation. Not with him like the way he was. Not when the truth of his dulled consciousness lay bare before me. So, very carefully, I declined his advances, my resolve firm despite the physical and emotional aches it caused. As I made my escape from his apartment, the lingering scent of him clung to my clothes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. Regret for getting involved with someone so inherently chaotic, so irresistibly messy. And as I secured the door behind me, shutting out the chaos of his world, I vowed to tread more cautiously in the future, to guard my heart against the allure of those who could only ever bring me turmoil. The morning after our disastrous night out, I woke with a sense of longing that bordered on obsession. I didn't bother showering or changing my clothes. I wanted to hold on to every lingering trace of Jacob's scent that clung to me. When my phone rang, a surge of excitement shot through me, and I scrambled across my apartment to answer it. His voice, rough with regret, filled my ears, and I found myself unable to resist his request to meet for lunch. Despite my better judgment, I agreed, unable to shake the pull he had over me. So, I braved the relentless rain once again, driving through the dreary streets of Shelton to meet him. As I entered the restaurant, I could sense his presence before I even laid eyes on him. He sat at a table in the corner, his expression unreadable as he awaited my arrival. But as I approached, I couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around him. The restaurant manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a steely demeanor, appeared from the kitchen. Her gaze lingered on Jacob with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Beside her, a busser darted furtive glances in Jacob's direction, his movements awkward and uncertain. It was clear they were both captivated by him. Both were drawn to him in the same way as the woman from the coffee shop was. In the same way as the man was drawn to him the night before. I knew better than to underestimate the danger lurking beneath his charming exterior. Chain restaurants like this one were breeding grounds for beings like the ones who watched him, creatures of evil who thrived on chaos. As I took my seat across from Jacob, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. I knew beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary lunch, a battle was raging, a battle for his soul and perhaps my own. And as I glanced around the restaurant, I couldn't help but wonder how many other unsuspecting souls fell prey to that mediocre steakhouse. As the afternoon bled into the early evening, His demeanor began to deteriorate before my eyes. His words slurred together, his movements unsteady, and my concern deepened with each passing moment. How could he possibly be getting drunk while he was supposed to be apologizing to me for his drunken behavior? The restaurant manager's gaze lingered on him with a hunger I could almost feel myself, while the busser, clearly uncomfortable, escaped outside for a cigarette break. It was as if they were under some kind of spell, unable to resist Jacob's allure. Worry gnawed at me as I watched him struggle to keep coherence, and I knew I had to get him out of there before things spiraled out of control. When I asked about his car, relief flooded through me as he admitted he didn't have one. Without hesitation, I offered to drive him home and he accepted, his gratitude clear despite his intoxicated state. But as we stepped outside, I felt a prickle of unease crawl over me. We were being followed. I glanced over my shoulder, my heart racing, and caught sight of the man from the night before lurking in a car nearby, his eyes trained on us. When we got into my car, I knew I couldn't shake the many tales we had without making Jacob aware something was going on. As we reached his apartment, I made an excuse to use the bathroom, though the truth was I had to see him all the way inside. As he turned the kitchen light on, he began to apologize once again, his words slurred and muddled. And then, as the tension reached its peak, there was a knock at the door. Instinct kicked in, and I rushed to answer it, though it wasn't mine to answer. To my confusion, standing there were two teenage boys looking down. They wanted in, and wouldn't make eye contact with me. After a few seconds, I noticed their eyes were entirely black as night. I shook my head at them, a silent warning before I slammed the door in their faces. Without warning, a struggle began where Jacob stood. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I turned to see the restaurant manager, the busboy, and the man from before restraining Jacob, their intentions unmistakable. Without hesitation, I drew my concealed weapon and took aim. The silver bullets gleamed in the dim light. In a heartbeat, I fired, ending the threat before they could hurt him. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by our ragged breaths. The weight of what happened hung heavy in the air as I stood before Jacob, my words sharp with urgency. He needed help, and he needed it now. But the look in his eyes told me he was more afraid of me than of the creatures I'd dispatched. I watched as the remnants of our adversaries dissolved into nothingness, their blood and flesh turning to magical dust, which scattered in the breeze. With a sad smile, I reassured him they weren't human. They were something far more sinister. And then, I dropped another bombshell on him. The succubus that had been following him long before we crossed paths at the coffee shop, the black-eyed kids at his door. It was a lot to take in, I knew, but he needed to understand the danger he was in. It took some time, but eventually, I was able to calm his fears and offer him protection. In his sobering reality, he didn't question how I knew about these creatures, how I knew what they were and why they were drawn to him. It was because I could sense it too. I was a Cambion, part demon, part human, and I knew all too well the allure of darkness that surrounded him. Part of me, the demon part, wanted to exploit this allure, to give in to the primal urges that threatened to consume me. But the human part, the part that still clung to notions of love and compassion, knew I couldn't abandon him to fend for himself. Despite the chaos that seemed to follow him wherever he went, I was determined to protect him. And as I looked into his eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and uncertainty, I knew whatever lay ahead, I would face it head on, for his sake and mine. But there were lessons he still needed to learn, simple protections against the forces of darkness that sought to claim him. I had a lot to teach him, so I started from the beginning. First on the agenda, the simple magic behind door and window locks.